Ben, people want to know how you adjust the levels just in the mask again. Could you cover that?
All I needed to do is have the mask active. As long as these little square corner things are on there, then any painting I do or adjustments or filters will only affect that.
Got it.
It won't affect the picture itself, either one of them, just the mask.
Perfect.
Okay?
Thanks.
All right, then let's get into filters. So you had asked about bending like fabric, as if there's something like that. Let's see if we could figure out how to do that. What I'm going to do is open this picture of me, and I'm going to put something on top of it. So I'll create a new layer, and right now I just want something that repeats where it would be like a pattern, where it'd be obvious if I bent that pattern. You'd be able to tell. So something like a grid would be good or whatever. I'll go to the Edit menu and say I want to fill. And one of the choices in fill is to fill with a pattern. And I don't know what pattern to use, but I want just something that, the one thing I wish this had was a preview so I could see what these tiny little patterns look like. You are not going to have all of the patterns that are here because I can recognize some of these as patterns that I've actually created. So I'm not sure if you'll have them, but you could pick a pattern as a test. Right now this is just a test though. You don't need a pattern for the technique. You need whatever it is you want to bend. So if this was the fabric I wanted to use on somebody's clothing, I would paste in a picture of the fabric. I just need a placeholder for whatever that would be. And I'm using this because it's simple, therefore hopefully you'll be able to tell if it bends or not. Afterwards, if we have time, we'll do it to a photographic image and it'll be possibly more interesting. So now I'm just going to hide that layer. We'll come back to it in a minute. I'm going to duplicate this picture now because I want it to bend that stuff based on this photo, but the filter I'm going to use to do that needs the information about how to bend it to be in a different file. And so we need to duplicate this picture. I'll go to the Image menu, and I'm going to choose Duplicate. All right, it just duplicated. I don't know if you can tell, but there are now two tabs open. This was the original, and this is the one I just had made. So here we have our duplicate. Now what we want to do is simplify this. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure there's no layers. So I flatten the image. If there happens to be any layers, that should get rid of them. To further simplify the image, we're going to get rid of any color. So I'm going to change the mode on this picture to a mode called grayscale. When you go to that mode, you can't have any color. Then to further simplify it, we're actually going to blur it. The reason why we're going to blur it is Photoshop is going to use the brightness of this image to figure out how to bend something. And the way it's going to work is all it's going to do is look at where this is bright. And wherever this is bright, it's going to push the thing we're trying to bend towards you. And wherever this is dark, it's going to push whatever it's trying to bend away from you. But if we have all the fine detail that's in here, then it thinks the pores on my skin are like drill holes. And they're like deep ones because they're dark, you know, that kind of stuff. And if I blur this, we're going to smooth out any of those little variations because otherwise they're going to be thought of as variations in height. So I'm just going to come over here, choose Gaussian blur, and I want to blur it not so much that I can't recognize what's there, not this, but so I don't see any fine detail at all. So let's see, right here is not enough because I can still see these little fine details, like a little thing there or whatever. But keep going just until the skin completely smooths out and doesn't look like it varies so much. But I can still recognize it is me, okay? Maybe this far. It's not an exact science as far as how far you got to go. The main thing is if you have little bitty variations, it's going to be little bitty variations in height in the bending. So I got to Gaussian blur by just choosing Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And I'm bringing it up to get rid of fine detail. Now I'm going to save this image. I'm just going to choose Save As. I'll put it on my desktop, and I'm going to use Photoshop file format. Then I can close the file if I want to, or I can leave it open. It doesn't matter, but it's going to read it off the hard drive when I do this. So I'll close it. Okay, now remember we worked on a duplicate image, so when I close the duplicate, the original is what's left over. Now everything we're going to do is going to happen to the thing we want to bend. And the fact that my face is underneath is irrelevant. I could delete that layer if I really wanted to, but afterwards I'm going to want it to be there, so that's why I'm leaving it there. But the filter I'm going to use will not be aware that my face is sitting there. Okay. I'm going to choose Filter, I'm going to choose Distort, and there's a choice called Displace. That was Filter, Distort, Displace. And when I choose Displace, this thing comes up. It wants me to type in 2 numbers. Those numbers tell Photoshop how mountainous I want my bending to be. Do I want it to be like little bitty hills that are barely moved? You know, it's as if we moved this fabric by an inch total. Or do I want it to look like you moved it by a mile? Well, the higher the number, the more severe the bending is. And you're, in general, guessing. And if when you're done it's too much or not enough, you simply choose Undo and you just try it a second time and you try it with a different number. I'm just going to type in 20. You always type in the same number for both. Then the choices below say what should it do if the file that I feed this, I'm going to have to feed it a file in a moment, is a different size than the file I'm running the filter on. Well, in our case, the 2 files are exactly the same dimensions, the width and height. So these settings down here don't matter. But if the file I fed it was a picture of my face, but here I'm applying it to something else. I'm applying it to a file of a different size. Should it scale it up, the file on my hard drive, or should it tile it, repeat it over and over again? You know, that kind of stuff. So we don't have to pay attention to those. I'm going to hit the OK button, and the moment I hit OK, it's going to ask me for a file. And I'm going to choose this one that I saved. I called it the map because this process is known as a displacement map. And that's the map it's going by as far as how to bend my image. So let's see what happens when I choose Open. Can you see something in there? Does it look a little bit like you see the outline of my head almost? It actually bent that. Can you see my eye sockets if you try to look hard enough? I can see a hint of eye sockets. There's one right there. There's another one right there. There's a mouth in there, and it's bending around certain areas. Well, most of the time, if you just feed something, if it's a car or a face, as long as the face or car or whatever the object is relatively evenly lit. It's not like half the surface is in the shade and the other half is bright. Instead, it's relatively even in the lighting. Then it can use the shading like that to bend something. So let's try it on a different image. I'll drag this one over, put it on top, and I'm going to scale this down. I'll type Command T, and then the handles for the scaling are way out beyond my edge of my screen because this file is so much bigger. I don't know if you remember or not, but you can zoom out to see the handles by typing Command 0. All right, now let's go and try the filter again. It was Filter, Distort, Displace, and you type in a number, click OK, and it asks you for a file. You feed it that file, and it should bend things. Now that doesn't look like it bent it all that much. It's somewhat subtle. So what I'll do is I'll choose Undo, and I'll simply apply the filter and type in a higher number. Let's see what happens if instead of typing in 20, I typed in 50. You see more bending? Now the problem is, it's hard to really have a reference for this because we don't have the shading of my face. If we had the highlights and the shadows of my face, then this would look a lot like it's been bent. So why don't we take a copy of my face. I don't know if you remember how to jump that to a new layer, but if I type Command J, you can jump it to a new layer, put it on top, and then I can get this to kind of interact with what's under it by playing with the different blending modes. This menu. We've used this menu only once or twice, I think. Didn't we use overlay and soft light to put some texture on something? Well, there's a way to experiment with all of these choices. And you can do some really creative things with these. And that is you can, to switch between them, here's how you can do it. Just go to the Move tool. Make sure that tool is active. And if that tool is active, hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and press plus or minus. Shift plus or minus cycles through that menu. And therefore, you don't have to manually use your mouse and go over here to the next one and let go, and then go to the next one and let go to experiment with it. Instead, as long as the Move tool is active, you can hold down Shift and hit the plus sign. And cycle through and see. Now, if you look, can you tell that this is bent? Can you see that where my brow is, the image kind of moves around it like that? And where my nose is, can you tell that this is kind of looping upward a little bit? If I were to use something like a grid, it might be a little more obvious, but it's kind of fun to use a photographic image. If you have evenly lit fabric or something similar, it can look rather interesting. What I like to do, though, if I want to actually apply it to something like somebody's face, is I'll actually do it in more than one layer. I'll take the face like this, put it in, and then I will, oftentimes I actually do the opposite. I put the texture on top. Let me do that. Put this underneath, textures on top, and then experiment with that menu. And what I'll do is I'll find one that looks somewhat interesting. Let's say that one. And then I'll duplicate the layer. Command J, that's the texture I'm duplicating. And then I'll cycle through the menu more and see if I can find another one that helps out. And if I find another one that helps out, if it's too much, I lower the opacity of it, so that I can have it in more than one mode and just vary the opacity. Then the final thing that I'll usually do is I'll mask it. So I might take these two, since it's two layers, and throw them in a folder. Remember how you can put folders to organize things? What's also nice about using folders is if you put things in a folder, then you can add a mask to it. And the mask affects all the layers inside. So therefore, I could come over here and paint with my paintbrush tool and say, I don't really want this on the background. So I can go and maybe somehow select the background. In this case, I'm using a tool called the Quick Selection tool. If I hide the texture, it might be easier to select because the sky is nice and clean. If it doesn't select, it means it's not looking at the layer that contains what you want. So click on that layer. You can also hold down the Shift key if you want to add to a selection, or the Option key, Alt and Windows to take away. And here I'll take away. Go back up to the layer that contains my textures, turn it on. And if I don't want that to go beyond out into the background, then if I want to hide things, I need to fill this with black. So let's fill. Now I see the layer mask is active, so that's where the filling is going to happen. If we fill with black, I should get it off of there. And now I have it on my face. But if you look at things like this line that's coming across, do you notice that the line actually looks like it's bent where my ear is? Right here. It looks like it's bent a little bit there. It looks like it's bent there where my mustache comes in. It looks like it's bent here, and so on. In this particular case, it's not like a perfectly looking like it's bent around it, but we can get something to look that way if you evenly lit something. And it is like fabric or a car or anything else, you can do this and it can look kind of interesting. I'd come in here and maybe get it off of my eyeballs by grabbing my brush tool. Paint with black, let my eyeballs pop through, and I could let other things like maybe my beard, goatee I should say, come through and get it off my hat. But experiment with that. And mainly experiment with different numbers when you end up feeding it that other picture, and you can make it look like things are more bent. The more the item that you're bending has a pattern to it, the more obvious the bend will be, the more organic it is, kind of like this image, the less obvious it will be. But if we were to come in and do something like that pattern again, I'll do it with a higher number. You might be able to see it a little better. We'll try 60. There, can you see my face in there? General feeling? It's not an exactly precise bend, but it's usually good enough for a lot of purposes and can look interesting. It's called a displacement map, and it needs a grayscale picture. And what it does with the grayscale picture is it ends up looking at bright areas and thinking they're close to you, and dark areas thinking they're far away from you. And that's how it figures out how to bend it. And with a lot of pictures, if it was evenly lit, this one's not perfectly evenly lit because this side of my face is brighter than this. So same with under my chin. But if this was more evenly lit, could get a little more idealistic version. But things that are recessed are generally darker in a lot of photos, and so it can get them to bend down into those recesses.